My name is Donald King, and I am here to moderate this discussion with the Marian Anderson String Quartet. Can we give them another round of applause, please? I had the good fortune of seeing them perform yesterday at Rhode Island College, and it was really an amazing experience. So I wanted to just tell you all again that I really appreciate it. And what we'll do is do some questions and have hopefully an open discussion and include you all in the discussion, and then they have also agreed to do a performance for us at the end. Am I correct?
That's correct.
We appreciate that. So we can jump right into it. Can well, first, before we get started, can you all please introduce yourselves and your instrument that you play?
Okay. I am Prudence McDaniel. I'm the cellist of the quartet. Originally born and raised in Des Moines, Iowa, and had an orchestral career before I joined the quartet 10 years ago.
All right, I'm Marian Henry. I'm the first violinist from New Orleans, Louisiana. I went up to Manhattan School of Music to study when I was about 21 years old. Met Deirdre there. We formed the quartet, and we've been together ever since.
Wow. I'm Nicole Cherry, and I am the second violinist of the Marian Anderson String Quartet. And since I am from Silver Spring, Maryland, which we'll be going to tomorrow, in fact. And basically, I, was what do they call me, the stalker before. No, I met the quartet when I was in school in New York, and proceeded to do a few things before that, teaching and playing in orchestras, and then finally got my dream opportunity to be in the quartet.
And I'm Deirdre Lawrence. I'm the violist of the Marian Anderson String Quartet. And I lucked out. I got my dream job right at the starting gate. I'm a founding member of this quartet. And at this point, how old are we?
24 years.
I'm 24 years old, the quartet, which means that the people you see before you are a little older than 24. But every day we get younger. Because we chose a career that makes us very happy.
Yes.
Thank you. Can each of you briefly describe or share with us what delivered you to music? Not classical music in particular, but to want to spend your life's work being a musician?
Ooh, that's a really good question. My parents were taking me to concerts from the time I was 6 months old. I was going to the symphony and going to chamber music concerts and listening to jazz. My father was a jazz trumpet player for the early part of his professional life. And I just knew from the time I was 8 years old that that was what I wanted to do. I was at a concert watching the great cellist, Janos Starker. And I was sitting in the third row, right underneath his F-holes, looking up at him avidly, and in one of the hardest passages of the Dvorak cello concerto, he looked down at me and he smiled. And in my heart, in my head, heart, everything, that moment was what sealed it. I said, that's what I want to do.
Wow.
Well, let's see. It started with my great-grandmother. She had 12 children. And she really loved the arts. And she lined every last one of those 12 children up in the morning to practice piano. Where they got the piano, I do not know, but it was there. I saw it.
New Orleans, right?
New Orleans, Louisiana, yeah. And so with that, of course, that went from that generation down to my mom's generation, who was quite a pianist. And so I don't ever remember not being without music. And there's a picture of me sitting at the piano, like at 2 years old or something like that. But so I was always around it. My mother always played classical music on the radio. And so when I was in third grade, some people came to my school and demonstrated the violin. And I don't know, it was just magic, and I always tell everybody that I heard the most beautiful rendition of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star you ever want to hear in your life. But honestly, it was like something came out of the violin like this, I could see visibly. And I ran home and I told my mother I have to do this. And she went out and got a violin that was a little bit too big, but that's okay. And I still remember sitting there in the living room, putting this thing up to my neck, just picking the finger, you know, like, how did she do this? And I think that, and also what was important is that my grandmother, whenever I didn't want to practice, I found myself over at her house where she played the Boston Pops and made us root beer and deviled eggs. And I sat there watching those violins, sea of blue coats, thinking, I can do that, I can do that. And so I think, you know, we just got in.
Wow. Thank you.
I think for me, it just like they're saying, it started for me at home. My parents, I have to say, are very supportive of just being connected with anything you're passionate about. And they knew I loved music, and at times I liked to dance, and at times I liked karate, you know, it's like, go for it, you know. You know. But my dad was very musical. I mean, he minored in music in college, and I was just telling faculty here that he went to Fisk University as well as University of Chicago, and he never went without music in his life. And he was in the Navy band as a trumpet player, and he would, I guess I was a daddy's girl, because he would just drive me everywhere. Everywhere I needed to go, whatever activity, he drove me. And we always just whistling wherever we went, come home, have dinner, after dinner, you know, go down and play some Thelonious Monk or some Schumann or some Chopin on the piano, you know, and I would just sit at his feet and be like, whoa, this is loud, this is wonderful, you know. And then on Friday, he had a subscription to, from the DC area, to the National Symphony Orchestra, and I would go with him in our little, you know, tier seat where, you know, you had a obstructed view. And I would fall asleep on his trench coat that was in his lap. And so there's always music there. And they signed me up for piano when I was 5 years old, just because, you know, music was an important part of education. And I enjoyed it, I loved it. I loved, you know, having that connection with my family in that way, you know. And so that's pretty much where every time I play, I can't not, double negative, think about my family, you know, think about my parents.
This is so awesome. And we've been friends and colleagues for such a long time. And then I sit and I listen to these stories, and every time I hear them, there's a new layer of detail.
Right.
And I get to know these awesome people a little bit better, which is very cool. There's a story in my family, apparently, that my fascination with music started before I actually entirely got here, in the womb. My mother, who's a huge classical music fan, would just play classical music around the house, and I would sit quietly whenever she played Mozart, and apparently start kicking like crazy whenever she played Beethoven. Which is funny, because actually of the two, I mean, it's hard to compare the two, but in personality type, I'm kind of a Beethoven girl. And there's another family story. I was very young. I didn't actually start playing until I was 15 years old. I started on violin, and I switched to viola when I was age 18. And this came up in a conversation earlier today, actually. I mean, I came from a very financially easily exhausted household. And so there was not a lot of resources available for lots of things. And so I didn't get to start studying until very late in my life. But apparently, art and music and reading, which was a huge, huge thing. My family are all very avid readers, were just a big part of my life growing up, like my colleagues. And it's one thing to love these sounds, but another to want to make them on the stage. And there was something about the stage that had a big draw for me. Apparently, my mother's worst nightmare happened at one of the church outings. We all went out to some amusement park or some fair or something, and she turned around, and her 5-year-old daughter is gone. You know, and she has a meltdown. She's running hysterically around the fair, wondering where her baby went. And she looks up, and there was a jazz band on one of the stages. And her 5-year-old daughter, me, is sitting in the middle of the stage, in the middle of the musicians going. You know what I mean? Because it sounds different this close. You know, and you can't get any closer to it than actually making it. And so I needed to get near it enough. Fumbled along for a while. My mother studied voice in her youth, and there was an assumption that I would do the same. same, and then a very similar story to my colleagues. Someone came to my school, played the violin, and I just thought it was magic and went berserk and had to have one, which was tricky for us again because times were tight. And it's so funny that the story's coming up twice in a day, but there was a moment that my mother had to make a decision about what she was going to do with these very meager finances that she was working with as a single mother raising her two children. There was a father in the picture, of course, her husband, but unfortunately he was both an alcoholic and a drug abuser, and then you add the fact that he starts to beat on his wife and children as a result. And she just got up one day and took one child in one hand and one child in the other and just kept running until they turned 18 to get us out of this household. And so things were very trying for us, and she had to make a decision. Are we going to have shoes and food, or are we going to have violin lessons? And she actually chose the violin lessons. And I remember we tell the story of us lining our shoes with cardboard. Every morning it was like a family ritual, line our shoes so we can actually walk on the ground. And Thursday night was payday, which means that Wednesday night, we lived in the South Bronx, and so Wednesday night, we would very politely go to one neighbor's apartment on every floor of the home where we lived, knock on the door and ask to borrow one egg so that we could make omelets to get through the final day before payday. And in this household, I had violin lessons.
Wow.
And so, yeah, that's kind of cool to me too, still.
Yesterday when I was watching you all perform, it struck me that that you all were having fun, or that there was something thrilling. There were moments when you all were playing together, and there was like, can you talk a little bit about what that's like in terms of the experience of playing together as a quartet?
Well, it's definitely an experience you can't get anywhere else.
Right.
my experience. You know, playing with my colleagues for so long, they know me, and I likewise know them. You know, and if we're really on a game, if somebody moves, I should be able to shift.
Right.
You know, and I think that's what's thrilling.
Right.
You know, and I mean, there's no words to tell you how special it is to know that three people know how I play and have my back.
Right.
And you come to rely on that. You come to rely on, you're playing a melody, you come to rely on them moving with you, or even pushing you a little bit, you know. And it's rough to put this into words, but you know, we have, if we're trying to make a crescendo, and a crescendo means get louder to get louder, and we've made a plan, and that the crescendo person is coming from the bottom, so say it's Prudence who's a cellist, you know, we're waiting for that. And that's very exciting to feel her push, you know, and then we just jump on and ride the wave, if you will, you know. And so that's very exciting. Sometimes it's hard. We had a student ask us a question this morning, do we ever get emotional? I mean, like really deep inside? Because she saw the same thing. And so basically it's, well, yes, but it has to stop at a certain point because we don't want to get carried away with it, you know. But I mean, you know, I do get the goosebumps and the so forth, and, you know, but it's very exciting, you know. It's really, you're asking a question that it's hard to put into words. But
You just did.
Oh.
I mean, and there's so many layers to that. I mean, I love what she said. And sometimes you just love the piece you're playing, you know, that the piece, you know, you might have, I mean, there's so many, you know, there's so much background to a performer in a piece of music that they're playing or singing or what have you, but they might have heard it when they were 3 the first time, and then finally, wow, they get to play on a professional level, and there's never, the chemistry between you and that piece never changes, you know? And so, and I remember actually Dvorak American was one of the first, probably the first string quartet I ever heard as a piece, you know, and I heard it performed, being from the DC area. And so to actually just feel that piece come from, dare I say, within me, from me, with my colleagues is the most, you can't even, exhilarating experience that a person could probably have, you know. And it is. It's not something you can totally write down and say, this is what I'm experiencing, but there's nothing like it. And we have things like that in life, like chocolate, right? You can describe how chocolate really makes you feel when you bite into it.
It's funny because some of it is musical. Some of it is musical and some of it is personal too. You know, we want to bring a piece of music to life, and we are the vehicles by which we do that. And so, like one of the pieces on the program, the Robert Pound, his version of Calvary starts with a very, very, very delicate opening led by second violin. And I'll be honest, the number one thought in my head is not take care of Robert Pound. Number one thought in my head is take care of Nicole. Just take care of Nicole. Just take care of Nicole. You know, because she's responsible for this moment. And so we take care of her, we're gonna be fine.
Right.
And so there's something very personal about it too. Or I remember once I saw Aerosmith performing, and Steve Tyler, I believe the lead singer, just got a little carried, just got moved by something. So he's a very expressive performer. And then off he went, and I saw the guitarist on the side of his face go, yeah, there he goes. You know, there's a little bit of that too.
Right,
a great piece of music compared to a Steve.
Right.
Getting a little spirit going.
Right.
Well, he himself, you know, has made this comeback, and he himself was interviewed. I'm not sure if it was the Oprah interview, but he said, you know, I mean, you're this great rock star, you know, lead man. I mean, probably the best. He said, I'm nothing without my guitar player. You know, nothing without my bass player. You should be talking to them. And I'm like, yeah.
I'm gonna compress two questions, or a few questions here. I'd like for you all to talk a little bit about why chamber music, what's the appeal, and then if someone else can take on, can you talk about the difference between the chamber music experience versus playing in larger orchestras or as a part of a philharmonic?
Sure. Well, the first time I ever played in a string quartet, I was drafted for a concert at the last minute, and I was in 3rd grade. And we played Haydn, and it was wonderful. And what I noticed, even that young, was that there was a big difference between the feeling of being out there as a soloist and being in a quartet. Safety in numbers, that you have an incredible responsibility for playing your part, because there's only one of you. You can't hide, but at the same time, you're not out there on stage doing it all by yourself. And that's so reassuring that, as Marianne said, that when you're out there and you're performing, you have 3 other people right there with you that have your back. It's one of the most incredible, it's one of the most incredibly safe feelings in the world, to be playing music in this configuration, because everybody has the same goal, everybody's moving forward in the music. It's kind of 8 hands, 1 heart. Yeah. And I actually left an orchestral career, and Nicole did too, to join the quartet, because for me, I was at that point freelancing. I was playing with West Virginia Symphony, and at one point I was freelancing with 3 different orchestras. I was playing with West Virginia Symphony, Wheeling Symphony, and Erie Philharmonic, and driving 30,000 miles a year and not leaving 3 states.
I was going to say, that's a lot of travel.
Yeah, it was draining.
Okay.
It was draining. And at a certain point, I had actually moved back home, because family had some health issues and Mom needed some help. And I thought, oh, I'll be there for 6 months. I was there for 6 years. Wow. But during that time, I was on the road. And part of what made me make the decision actually to leave Pittsburgh and move to Ohio was the fact that one day I walked into my apartment, and out of 1 month, I was there 5 days. And it was, when you walk in and your space doesn't have an energy signature, It's not you. It feels like, oh yeah. So, but the question was the difference between playing with an orchestra and playing chamber music. Playing in an orchestra is less personal. For me, it was a matter of having artistic decisions be mine, rather than just having to do what the person on the podium wanted you to do the way they want you to do it, and it's like being a worker bee. So this is much, much more satisfying because there's accountability in all parts, and that's much more satisfying.
A few more questions, then I'll open it up to the audience. Deirdre, when we spoke last time, you said something that has kind of stayed with me for days, which was the mantle of responsibility.
Oh, Lord, child, yes.
Can you talk about what this entails and why you all, or how you came about to select or be selected to be allowed to use Marian Anderson's name as the namesake of your string quartet?
It's a luxury problem, that mantle of responsibility. It's a weighty name to carry, you know, and we always want to do personally and professionally justice to it. In 1991, when we won the Cleveland Quartet competition, and we found out we were the first African-American string quartet to win the competition in the classical field in history, we were very overwhelmed, again, by that weighty responsibility. The step we take next really matters because it's going to resonate historically.
Right.
And we were named after Cecile Chaminade at the time. We thought, oh, we're all women, we'll sort of celebrate that component of who we were. And after winning the competition, we sat down with Dr. Robert Freeman, who was the director of the Eastman School of Music, and we'd won the Cleveland Quartet competition. We're at the Eastman School working with the Cleveland Quartet. And we're thinking about this and trying to find a name for the quartet that can tell the whole story of who we are and what we believe in a handful of words. And we went through a couple of options that we talked about. We went through Martin Luther King Quartet, Martin Luther King Jr., Quartet. We went through Frederick Douglass as an option because he was a violinist as well. And we eventually settled on Marian Anderson, even though she was not an instrumentalist, because we felt like her vision of how to address what matters by addressing what matters was very, very clear. Rather than argue decisions being made in this country about race relations that needed to be argued, she chose to sing. And you hear that voice, and there is no argument. And to put the art form first, to lead the way for other changes, was just very important to us. And so we really thought that Marian Anderson's name would be the right one for us. And so through the channels of the Eastman School of Music, we connected with her people, and we're incredibly blessed by her approval. And so she allowed us to use her name as the name of our quartet from that point forward. And it gave us this gift and this burden of carrying her name into the next century, into the next generation. And I'm grateful for that burden. I know that we all are, because you can't fall asleep behind the wheel carrying a name like that. So,
thank you. I think I want to break form and open it up to the audience. Please.
Could you talk a little bit about the commissioning project that you introduced to us last night?
Oh, absolutely. Well, thank you for that question, because it falls right under the category of what Deirdre was mentioning right now, where it is a dedication to Marian Anderson and her legacy as a great, wonderful artist. Unfortunately, sometimes we go into schools and kids still don't know who she is. So we're happy to share that. And so we want to leave something more to keep her legacy alive. And I'll say this, Marian Anderson's anniversary of her singing at Lincoln Memorial is actually next year, April 2014, 75th anniversary. And that moment also happens to fall on our 25th anniversary of us being together as a quartet. And so we tried to come up with something that would help celebrate that, but also, again, bring attention to how important what Marian Anderson did, and for music and for civil rights, American rights, in our history. And so this commissioning project is a celebration of that. And what it is, it's called the Continuing the Legacy Project. And so what it is a way of bringing back, Marian Anderson after every recital would do what? She would sing a few spirituals. Every recital. That was just part of her tradition in her recital. So what we do is bring two things together: the greatness of this great body of music, the Negro spiritual, again, which is over a century old, as well as remembering what Marian Anderson did musically. So we're gathering composers as we discuss different aspects about it to reimagine the spiritual in a 21st century language, meaning whatever it is the composer of today feels they're inspired by, based on whatever history they've had in their compositional style, they bring it to the whatever spiritual that they choose, really. You know, sometimes they ask, which one should I do? But generally they choose their own. And so right now we have 5 that we're working with, and we hope to keep, you know, having a turnover where every year or every 5 years we work with another 5, another 6 composers, that sort of thing. So it's on its way. It's because commissioning projects are long, and they take time, obviously, because the composer has to write the piece. And you have to find money for the piece before they write the piece. So, but it is a very exciting project to many, many composers, and I found a lot of people that are interested in finally hearing the program. So hopefully it will come along. I say the list that we have now is Tani Leon, who is considers herself an Afro-Cuban composer, American. Wonderful, wonderful support of the quartet. She wants to really help us with this. Mark O'Connor, you might know as a great fiddler, American fiddler. Billy Childs as a jazz composer and pianist. Laura Kaminsky, composer who's also the director of Symphony Space, artistic director of Symphony Space in New York, and Adolphus Hailstork, who African-American composer, lives in Virginia right now.
Any other questions from the audience?
Yes.
I have a question as ensemble. How do you go about choosing the selections that become part of your program?
Oh, how do you go about choosing the selections that you play? And
Well, we have to, it's so simple, it's to like them. It has to fit our personality, you know, to do so. I think we're very kind of a hot-blooded, you know, very emotional group, you know, and so the piece has to fit us, or we won't play it, you know. And, but there are always times where, you know, each of us will bring a quartet in and say, how about this, you know, and we'll say, well, maybe, maybe not, you know, so it's basically, I want to say it's that easy, but also we have to consider the program, you know, you have to have beginning pieces and pieces that fit well in the middle, and then ending pieces. So we have to fill those categories. But always it has to fit our personality, our identity as a group.
Can you talk a little bit about your outreach work that you do with students and young people?
Oh, sure. We have kind of layers to that as well. We definitely go to schools, and we play for the different levels of students, and we gear our programs to whatever age, you know, that the students are. So we know that we're not talking down to them. We've done this for so long that, you know, we know when you're playing for kindergartners through second grade, you know, it's very animated.
Right.
You know, and as it gets, as we get older, as the kids get older, especially high school kids, it has to be more personal. They want to know your struggles.
Right.
You know, it's how we keep their attention. But we also have a summer music program, Chamber Music Institute.
Yep.
You know, which was honestly, Nicole is the one who's in charge of it, and she can, you know, it's really a beautiful thing. You want to talk a little bit about it?
Okay. That actually ties into the fact that we have a community music school where we live in Bryan, College Station, Texas. And what Marianne is referring to, I mean, it's, again, she said many layers, but what she's referring to is our Summer Chamber Music Institute. And this started, we are in our 8th year of this. And I mean, this quartet is, I have to say that, again, I joked about being like a stalker, but I said the room get really quiet when I say that, you know? Like a still, you know, like, okay, wait, we don't talk about stalkers in Rhode Island. But no, I have been admiring this group for so long, you know, and watching what they did. In fact, when I was at Juilliard, I saw them do an outreach concert in a Brooklyn church, you know. I just happened to see the flyer. My brother lived in Flatbush Avenue or something like that, and he was just graduated Manhattan School of Music, and I was visiting him, and I just walking down the street, and I said, oh, there's a picture of 4 black people with string player, with strings in their hands. What's that about? I mean, you know, this is 1993 or something, and that's the first time I'd ever seen anything like that. I mean, of course I had black friends that played string instruments, but a collection, like in one picture, whoa, that's deep, you know. So I was like, I don't know what my brother has planned for me, but I'm going to this thing at 2 o'clock, you know. And so I went in and saw them perform, went backstage, and I talked to each one of them. And I talked to Ginger, she doesn't remember me at all.
20 years later, I'm still
sorry. But I was so drawn by the commitment to reaching out to the community. Even just in that one instance that I saw them, I was like, this is wonderful. This was before I actually saw their picture on the big marquee for Alice Tully Hall, you know, half a year later or however it was. And I was like, whoa, there they are again, in the big hall. And so I went to that and then crashed their party afterwards. I was like, these people are cool, you know. So that is definitely the embodiment. I mean, these kind of things that we're doing are just kind of natural for us. I mean, you know, not saying anything about my colleagues, because you choose what you want to do at whatever, but there are a lot of groups that are that's not just a part of what they're doing, and that's great. You know, great concerts are great concerts, but it almost feels weird when we go somewhere and we just have to play a concert. You know, we love it when, you know, yes, you know, before, after, during, you know, and it's nice to come someplace and to see that the community cares to have, okay, well, we're bringing this group in, let's immerse them in our community with our kids and you know, get to know them, and we love that, you know, it's important to us. So that's, I mean, I could talk about these little, you know, fragmented things that we're doing, but this is natural. So why don't we have a camp? Why don't we have master classes? We have master classes every month, you know, free of charge for the kids to come and play for us, you know, what have you. That's just, you know, why wouldn't you have that?
You're saying a ton of stuff that's really, really interesting. But as you're talking, I'm thinking about this natural quality and how it's natural for some and it's not natural for others. And then it's got me thinking about this moment. Here we are, we're sitting here in this gorgeous black box, you know, just chatting. And then here we are with someone who was at 2 of our outreach concerts today and who had lunch with us as well. And we're basically the same people in all those situations.
Yes, they're not faking it, I think.
We're really this crazy.
On the stage, Anderson. There is no in the children's concert, Anderson. There is no in the group discussion, Anderson. We're just us. And I think part of our appeal is our authenticity.
Yeah.
And so we follow it and we trust it and we try to build stuff with it. And here we are.
Yeah.
So, like you just said, you had brought up a lot of interesting points, and you talked about that moment of walking down the street and seeing a constellation of black women in strings, and what that was like. Can you talk a little bit about your experience in working with African American youth, children of color, even poor children of any race, and how you all deal with or inspire or allow them to know that they have access to this particular kind of music, because they don't have a lot of things that kind of can verify this path or this career. There aren't very many role models.
It comes back to
Does
the
that
issue
make any
of
sense?
But it comes back to the issue of authenticity.
Yes.
Again, I think the worst role model is the person who steps out trying to be a role model.
Right.
I think we work with lots of people of varying backgrounds, of varying sort of financial stratas, and we come from a variety of them as well. And so we just talk and we tell the truth and we connect. And like Marian was saying, we talk about our struggles personally and professionally in a very open and authentic way, and you can feel confident that it can be done because you're witnessing someone who is doing it.
Yes.
And there is no artifice. And people tend to trust us. As a result, young people tend to trust us. And one of the things we talk about a lot, came up actually in some of today's shows, is there is a painful, and I can speak honestly about this, there's a painful passivity that settles over people that are poor, like a miasma. And it's hard to crack your way out of. Yeah, and most of the time you don't even know it's there until someone comes along and shows you a reflection of it, so you can finally see this thing that is settled on you. And so one of the things that comes up a lot is these awesome things have happened for this quartet. They didn't happen by accident. They didn't happen by accident. We reached for something. We tripped and stumbled every step of the way, but we keep reaching for something. We will send in that application. Okay, sorry, I'm getting all comfy now. Let me talk about these people sitting here. We all went to conservatories and music schools. We all have masters and bachelors and extended degrees in music. Do you have a degree in storytelling? No. Do you have a degree in QuickBooks? No. Do you have a degree in grant writing? A degree in entrepreneurship?
Yes, there is such a...
Life gave us one. Because we wanted to make something interesting happen, and rather than sit in that miasma, we just closed our eyes and leapt. And we had a saying way back in the really, really early days of the quartet. You know you're a quartet player when you can hold hands professionally and just jump off a cliff and know that the wind will scoop you up and settle you on your feet. Because again, we want to crack open that belief that I can't. Well, says he, you can try. Do something. Get ready for your blessing was the big moral of the story today.
I'm kicking myself because my son and daughter should be here. When you talk about authenticity, it really comes through with each one of you. And I'm looking at this little girl over here, not to single you out, but I just think she's so fortunate to be in this room right now. She made me think that I should have brought my daughter and my son here. But thank you all. Really, this was really wonderful. Are there any more questions? Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about how you got Marian Anderson's blessing, and then once you got it, it's like, oh my God, now we've got it. Now we do have this mantle.
When we won the Cleveland String Quartet International Competition, I think as Deirdre said, all of a sudden we became role models, and so we were named at the time Chaminade Ensemble, and Chaminade was a white female composer, and at the time we were all female. When we first started as a quartet, when we won the competition, we did have one. We had one fellow in the group, but we were still called that. But so we changed our name to, of course, Marian Anderson, and then so the director of the Eastman School of Music, Robert Freeman, made contact with James DePriest, who recently passed, who was the conductor of the Portland Symphony, yeah, and as the nephew of Marian Anderson. So we were able to go that way.
Wow.
They flew
He's
us
her
out.
nephew. He's her nephew.
Yes.
Wow.
He recently passed, you know.
Yeah, just recently.
Ago.
Yeah. So they flew us out, and we played for her, met her, played for her. It was like
Wow.
meeting royalty, of
Yeah.
course, and got her blessing. And
Wow.
we still remember this. Actually, if you Google Marian Anderson String Quartet and click on pictures, you would see a picture of us that says we signed it to her, and you'll see some images. But what I remember was that we gave her this photo, and she put it on the piano next to her and John F. Kennedy. You know, on the grand piano. And
Where'd you play for her?
Oh my goodness, we played some high. What?
Where?
Oh, where? Oh, it was just in her apartment.
Oh, that's all.
Yeah. that informal.
Wow, sweet. Sweet. Wow. So then, like, what'd you guys do when you left her apartment? Did you all faint? Or?
I remember most of it. I cried like a child.
Yeah.
Pardon?
I cried like Christmas came early. I cried like a child for the next like 2 weeks.
Oh,
I
yeah.
have no memory of much. I promised myself I wasn't dead of it. I'm not gonna go well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
We have another question.
Yeah, I wondered if you could say a little more about the details of the project that you're undertaking in her honor. You touched on it, but the reference to Middle Passage and whatever else is relevant.
Sure. It is in its beginning stages, and only actually the thought of it is not, but the fact is that commissions take a bit of time, and so you know, being where we are in the state of our country's finances, it's much harder to find grants, and we have very, very generous composers working with us. However, everybody's got to eat, so we can't ask them to write certain pieces. But can you kind of lead me?
Well, so in part it is, it's a project of having, soliciting or obtaining original compositions or adaptations?
Yes,
okay.
yes. Actually, basically what the premise of it is, James Weldon Johnson, Hall Johnson, Moses Hogan, these great composers of the early 20th century and musicians would always arrange, Harry Burleigh would arrange spirituals just as a part of, you know, keeping the tradition alive of these spirituals, and they would actually format them, I should say, in the style of a concert piece, so they could be performed by Paul Robeson, you know, or Marian Anderson, for example. And what we want to do is do exactly that same thing, but in the genre of a string quartet. And so that I wouldn't say that it's gone, but I think that the whole idea of singing spirituals even is very traditional for an African American singer to sing a few spirituals after the recital. At least when I was growing up it was. But I don't see that much anymore. But I do believe, honestly, and I was telling again a faculty member out there that my father was a sociologist. At the time, there was no Africana studies, but his specialty was Black studies. And so I'm very much deeply committed to my own heritage musically as well as just historically. And so it's not, you know, feigned. It's not like I'm Black and so let me make sure that I know this stuff. Actually, they know this, that it's just a part of me. and I really, really, really love my own history. And so somehow or another, before I pass on, I was going to figure out how to combine what I do and my own history. In fact, it's great that you're asking me this question. I mean, it's a very, very fresh project, so pardon me for stuttering a little bit, but I was at Juilliard. I always, try to be careful about naming names, but I had a professor there, history professor, American history, and we all had to do a thesis or project there, a written report. And I chose to do a selection of Black composers. And I was just getting, it's just like seeing the picture of the quartet walking down Flatbush Ave. I was like, wow. And I'm from, I grew up in a Jewish neighborhood, and so, but it was a very accepting neighborhood. I guess it was like one of those things where I didn't know I was Black, but because everybody was, accepting of just everybody. And I just, at home, I had to learn about Black history and, all the great historical figures and moments in life. But that was just part of the family dinner moment, And I went out, and my friends were Asian and Chinese, and Jewish, and, it was not a big deal. But then I go out into the world, and I was like, whoa, it's a little different out here. And I went, again, this example that kind of brings me back to what you're saying is that I asked my professor, I said, I'm struggling to find some background on some of these composers. And he said, well, why don't you go to that museum that starts with an S there down the street? And I was like, well, that starts with an S. I was like, that was the time where you didn't pick out your phone and be like, S, S/library, what pops up? So I was walking down the street looking for a library name with an S, and it's like, oh, the Schomburg, okay, yeah, that, that.
Right,
and so, right? And so I went in there, I was like, whoa, there's a lot of stuff in here, and so, kind of shame on me because of, again, the background that I had. I should have, I should have expected that there had been
history.
Right, of American history, so, but we won't,
No.
we should name. But anyway, so there's always been this passion for me to combine the two, and that without it feeling fake or forced, but there's this element of combining all the, what did this wonderful playwright say? She said, mixing the intertwining of two worlds.
Mingling of traditions.
The mingling of traditions, and I said, amen.
This is neat. Just to continue running with your question, this is very exciting because this all traces its way back to the fact that these things are flowing organically out of the nature of who the quartet is.
Yep.
It's not like woke up one day and said, hey, tell you what, let's commission you both to write a bunch of spirituals. We've been carrying, some of which we presented on our program last night.
I thought
we've been carrying
that pieces.
Exactly, we've been carrying sort of the foreshadowing of this project with us for quite some time. And then to this we add some sort of starter compositions like the Pound or the Tippus that we played last night. We've been carrying forward Taylor Ferguson's calendar with us probably for about 10 years or so. And this, we went through a lot of potential names for this project and eventually ended on continuing the legacy. One of the potential names was the Spiritual Renaissance Project, because you will still find a singer on the stage ending their recital with a Negro spiritual. But the beauty of these slave songs is that they move through a progression historically, that they started in the field, and then they moved from the field to the concert stage through the voices of a Paul Robeson or a Marian Anderson. And our question in part is, well, here we are. How can we contribute to what happens next? We teach classes at a small community college in Bryan College Station named Blinn College. And when it comes time to talk about nationalism, we talk about Antonin Dvorak, and I always have a reference to the spiritual that is quoted in his New World Symphony. And I have a little portion of the lecture that I do about the spiritual. And so we watch Kathleen Battle singing Swing Low, Sweet Chariot with the New York Philharmonic and the Harlem Boys Choir. And then we watch Beyonce do an interpretation of Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, because so these songs continue to reinterpret themselves. And we want to contribute to that reinterpretation. And we're choosing the composers that she mentioned very, very specifically. Tanya Leon, awesome Afro-Cuban composer, is entirely atonal. Let's take a look at what that version of the next generation of the spiritual will be. And then here's Billy Child, African-American composer with a jazz interpretation of these spirituals. And it's intentional that Mark O'Connor is on the list. Mark O'Connor is a huge supporter of great new American music. There's a reason why Laura Kaminsky is on this list. Laura Kaminsky is Jewish. We want to have a representative of all of us contributing to this ongoing rich tradition of this music. And so again, it grew out of the S professor. And it turned into this. And so it evolves.
I think it's time to hear some music. What do you all think? Yeah?
Yeah.
We'll give them a round of applause.
I think we're going to play last movement of William Grant Still's piece, movement from the Stanzas of Panama. encore that we played last night, written by Gregory Tivis, who's a local composer in Bryan College Station, who found out that we were doing this spiritual project and really wanted to write something for the quartet. And we were just very impressed with it that we told him we were taking it on the road. So